always believed everyone deserves an education, but back in 1959, I never expected my most dedicated student would be a Bigfoot watching my one-room schoolhouse from the Montana tree line. While the town saw a monster to be hunted, my students and I discovered a lonely intelligence begging to learn. We started a secret classroom in the woods, exchanging homework on a stump, until the outside world threatened to destroy the unique bond we had formed. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from. And if you're interested in more stories about unexpected encounters in the wild, please consider subscribing to the channel. The autumn of 1959 arrived in the Bitterroot Valley, not with a whisper, but with a sudden biting frost that turned the golden tamaracks into shivering ghosts. My world was a 14 by 20 foot rectangle of white clapboard sitting in a meadow that felt like the edge of the known universe. To the east lay the dirt road that connected us to the town of Hamilton, 20 miles away. To the west, the mountains rose up like a bruised purple wall, dense with lodgepole pine and secrets. I was Henry Carlisle, 33 years old, the sole custodian of the minds and futures of District 9. A job that felt less like teaching and more like keeping a lighthouse burning in a dark sea. The schoolhouse was a relic even then. A drafty structure that smelled permanently of wet wool, chalk dust, and the wood smoke that leaked from the potbelly stove in the center of the room. I arrived every morning at 6:30, long before the sun crested the Sapphire Mountains, to shovel coal and break the ice in the water bucket. It was a solitary ritual, the silence only broken by the scratching of mice in the walls and the rhythmic thump of my own boots on the floorboards. I cherished those quiet moments, organizing the McGuffey readers and sharpening pencils, preparing the stage for the chaos that would inevitably descend. I had 15 students that year, a unruly constellation of ages ranging from 6 to 14, spanning 1st through 8th grade. It was a logistical puzzle that required the strategic mind of a general. While the 1st graders were learning their ABCs on slate boards, the 8th graders were struggling through the causes of the Civil War. I was the conductor of a cacophonous orchestra, moving from row to row, switching between teaching phonics and algebra in the span of a single breath. It was exhausting work, but there was a purity to it that I loved. The raw, unpolished potential of children who knew how to calve a cow but had never seen an ocean. I wasn't a local. I had come from Chicago with a degree in literature and a romantic notion of bringing the Enlightenment to the frontier. The locals viewed me with a mix of suspicion and bemusement, a man in a tie who didn't hunt and spent his evenings reading poetry. But they respected the way I treated their children. I didn't just teach them to pass tests. I taught them that the world was bigger than the valley. I hung maps on the walls that covered the cracks in the plaster, tracing lines to Paris and Rome, trying to ignite a spark of curiosity that would burn brighter than the harsh Montana winter. The children were tough, forged by the same brutal landscape that shaped the twisted pines outside. They walked miles to get to school, wrapping their feet in burlap sacks over their boots to keep out the snow. They arrived red-faced and panting, shedding layers of coats and scarves like molting birds. They didn't complain about the cold or the long walk, it was just life. But despite their hardness, they were still children, prone to daydreaming and mischief, their eyes drifting to the windows where the forest beckoned with a wild, dangerous allure. Education here was a battle against the elements and the calendar. We raced against the harvest in the fall and the blizzards in the winter. If the snow got too deep, the school closed, sometimes for weeks. I felt a desperate urgency to fill their heads with as much knowledge as possible before the weather cut us off. I read to them aloud every afternoon, Dickens, Twain, London, watching their faces soften as they were transported out of their hardscrabble lives. For a few hours, the schoolhouse wasn't just a building. It was a time machine, a spaceship, a sanctuary. The isolation of the place was absolute. There was no telephone in the schoolhouse. If an emergency happened, I had to send the fastest runner to the nearest ranch, 2 miles away. We were an island. The silence of the surrounding woods was a physical weight, pressing against the glass. Sometimes, during quiet reading time, the silence felt heavy, watchful. The wind would whistle through the eaves, sounding like a voice trying to whisper a secret. I would catch myself staring out at the tree line, feeling small and exposed, a single point of order in a vast wilderness. As November deepened, the days grew shorter, the shadows stretching long across the floorboards by 2 p.m. The transition to winter changed the mood in the room. The light became gray and flat. The students became restless, sensing the coming confinement. We focused on the basics: penmanship, arithmetic, history, trying to build a foundation that would hold up under the weight of the snow. I was strict but fair, believing that discipline was the highest form of love I could offer them. I wanted them to be ready for a world that wouldn't care how well they could ride a horse. I loved the rhythm of the day, the ringing of the brass handbell, the scraping of chairs, the chorus of, "Good morning, Mr. Carlisle." It was a civilized ceremony in the middle of nowhere, but the wilderness was always there, just on the other side of the wall. We were guests here, staying by the grace of nature. The woods didn't care about our timetables or our textbooks. They just waited, patient and ancient, growing closer every year as the saplings encroached on the playground, reclaiming the land inch by inch. One Tuesday morning, the routine broke. The students usually arrived in a noisy cluster, laughing and shouting, their breath hanging in the air like steam. But on this day, the arrival was different. The younger children came in quiet, looking over their shoulders. The older boys were gripping their lunch pails a little too tightly. 7-year-old Tommy Miller, usually the first to run to the stove to warm his hands, walked in with a face pale as milk. He didn't take off his coat. He just stood by my desk, trembling, and whispered, "Mr. Carlyle, the woods are looking at us." I knelt beside Tommy's desk, keeping my voice low so as not to spook the rest of the room, though the silence told me they were all listening. "What do you mean the woods are looking, Tommy?" I asked gently. He twisted his cap in his hands, his knuckles white. "There's a man," he whispered, his eyes wide and watery. "A big, hairy man. He stands by the big cedar tree at the bend. He doesn't move. He just watches us walk." I tried to offer a rational explanation, a hunter in a ghillie suit, a bear standing on hind legs, but Tommy shook his head vehemently. "No, sir, he has hands, and he looks sad." By recess, the dam broke. It wasn't just Tommy. Sarah, a pragmatic fourth grader who could skin a rabbit without flinching, admitted she had seen the shadow moving parallel to the road for a week. The Miller brothers claimed something had been throwing pine cones at them, not to hurt them, but to get their attention. The descriptions were consistent and unsettling. Tall, covered in dark hair, walking upright, but moving with a silence that no human could replicate. The schoolyard, usually a riot of tag and baseball, became a huddle of anxious whispers. They weren't playing. They were scanning the tree line, standing back to back like a herd of elk sensing a wolf. The fear didn't stay contained in the classroom. By the next morning, I had parents waiting on the porch steps, hard men with weathered faces and rifles in the racks of their trucks. They spoke of vagrants and creeps, the kind of dangers that terrified isolated communities more than any wild animal. "We're organizing a party on Saturday, Mr. Carlyle," one father told me, spitting tobacco into the snow. "If there's some pervert watching our kids, we'll track him down and handle it." I nodded, feigning agreement to keep the peace, but my stomach turned. Their handling it usually involved a rope or a shallow grave. I promised them I would keep a sharp eye out and keep the children indoors during recess if necessary. But the scientist in me, the part that had studied biology before literature, was itching with curiosity. A vagrant wouldn't survive these temperatures in just a coat. A bear wouldn't track children for a week without attacking. I began doing my own patrols. After the final bell rang and the children disappeared down the road, I didn't go home. I walked the perimeter of the schoolyard, studying the fresh snow, looking for the evidence that would separate fact from hysteria. It didn't take long to find it. About 50 yards into the tree line, near a massive ponderosa pine that offered a clear view of the playground, the snow was packed down hard. It wasn't the erratic trampling of a bear. It was a standing spot. The prints were obscured by the melt and refreeze, but they were massive, long, wide, and shoeless. But what chilled me wasn't the size, it was the debris. Scattered around the base of the tree were discarded items, a broken pencil, a torn page from a spelling workbook, a red rubber ball that had gone missing weeks ago. It wasn't a predator's nest, it looked like a collection. I decided to stay late on Thursday, long after the sun had set, grading papers by the light of a kerosene lamp. I turned the wick down low, leaving the room in semi-darkness so I could see out without being seen. The silence of the schoolhouse was profound, the ticking of the wall clock the only sound in the world. I sat at my desk, watching the window that faced the forest, waiting for the watcher to return. Hours passed. My eyelids grew heavy. I was just about to pack up and admit defeat when a shadow detached itself from the trees and moved into the moonlight. It wasn't a man. Even from this distance, the proportions were wrong. The arms too long, the chest too barrel-shaped, the head sitting directly on the shoulders. But it wasn't an adult monster either. It was lanky, awkward, moving with the gangly coordination of an adolescent. It stood perhaps 6.5 feet tall, small for the legends, but massive for a human. It crept toward the schoolhouse, not with the stealth of a hunter, but with the tentative curiosity of a shy child approaching a group of strangers. It paused at the swing set, touching the cold chains with a reverent gentleness. I held my breath, terrified that the squeak of my chair would send it bolting. The creature moved closer, stepping into the halo of light cast by the single lamp I had left burning. I saw its face clearly for the first time. It was covered in fine, dark hair, but the skin around the eyes and mouth was bare and expressive. It didn't look malicious. It looked fascinated. It walked right up to the window, pressing its face against the glass, its breath fogging the pane. It wasn't looking at me. It was looking past me, at the blackboard where I had left the day's arithmetic problems, written in chalk. It stood there for a long minute, its eyes darting across the room, taking in the maps, the rows of desks, the alphabet strip above the chalkboard. It was drinking in the environment. Then, it did something that made my heart stop. It raised a long, dark finger and traced the line of the alphabet on the glass, moving from A to Z, mimicking the motion I made every single morning with my pointer. It wasn't reading, surely, but it was imitating the ritual. It had been watching us close enough to memorize the routine. Bigfoot eventually pulled back, startled by the hoot of an owl, and melted back into the night. I sat there in the dark, my grading pen forgotten in my hand. The fear of a predator evaporated, replaced by a profound, heartbreaking realization. This wasn't a monster stalking prey. It was an outcast looking in. It was a lonely, intelligent thing that was drawn to the one place in the valley dedicated to learning, barred by biology from joining the class. And as I looked at the smudged handprint left on the glass, I realized I had a new student, one who was begging to be taught. The next day, recess became a field study rather than a break. While the children shrieked and chased each other in a chaotic game of tag, I stood on the porch, clutching my coffee mug, my eyes locked on the tree line. I wasn't looking for a threat anymore. I was looking for an audience. It didn't take long. As the noise of the playground reached its peak, I saw the familiar dark shape separate itself from the shadows of the spruce trees. It stood just beyond the boundary fence, partially obscured by brush, motionless but intensely focused. It wasn't stalking a meal. It was watching the game with the intense, unblinking concentration of an anthropologist studying a new tribe. I watched, mesmerized, as the creature began to move. It wasn't advancing. It was mirroring. When the Miller boys ran left, the Bigfoot shifted its weight left. When little Sarah tripped and fell, he lurched forward a step, its hand reaching out instinctively before pulling back. It was a visceral, empathetic reaction. It wasn't just observing the mechanics of the play, it was vibrating with the energy of it. It wanted to join in. I saw its legs twitching, suppressing the urge to run, a lonely child on the sidelines of a game it didn't know the rules to, held back by a barrier stronger than the wire fence. The mimicry became undeniable during our morning song. We usually started the day by singing "My Country 'Tis of Thee," or simple folk songs on the porch if the weather held. As the children's voices rose, thin and sweet in the cold air, I saw the creature's head bobbing. It wasn't random. It was keeping time. It was swaying its massive torso to the rhythm of the melody, a crude but unmistakable attempt to synchronize with the group. It was trying to harmonize with a society that would shoot it on sight, drawn to the music like a moth to a flame, finding a pattern in the noise that it desperately wanted to understand. I began to notice that its interest wasn't limited to play. When I took the older boys outside for a practical lesson on geometry, measuring the height of the flagpole using shadows, the creature moved closer. It watched us drive the stakes into the ground and stretch the twine. When we went back inside, I watched from the window as it crept out of the cover. It walked over to the holes left by our stakes. It picked up a discarded piece of twine. It tried to stretch it between two rocks, mimicking the action of measurement. It didn't understand the math, but it understood the method. It was attempting to replicate the experiment. This behavior shattered every assumption I had about the wild. Animals forage. They don't study. Animals play to practice hunting. They don't practice geometry. I was looking at a mind that was starving for structure. The creature was an autodidact, a self-taught intelligence trying to reverse engineer human culture from the outside looking in. It was a heartbreaking sight, a being with a capacity for learning, trapped in a life of survival, pressing its nose against the glass of civilization, begging for a curriculum. I realized that the items I had found earlier, the pencil, the workbook page, weren't trash to him. They were artifacts. They were the tools of the trade he was trying to master. He recognized that these objects held power, the power that allowed the small, hairless humans to dominate the valley. He was gathering them like religious relics, hoping that by possessing the tools, he could acquire the knowledge. He was a student without a teacher, trying to learn to read by staring at the shape of the letters without knowing the sounds they made. The fear I had initially felt for my students' safety was replaced by a profound sense of professional obligation. I was a teacher. My vocation was to nurture curiosity wherever I found it. Did it matter that the student was 7 feet tall and covered in fur? Did the shape of the skull determine the worth of the mind? I watched him struggle to hold a round stone like a piece of chalk, making scratching motions on a flat rock. and I felt the same tug in my chest that I felt for the slow readers in the first grade. He was trying so hard. He was putting in the effort. I started to see the schoolhouse through his eyes. It wasn't just a building. It was a temple of knowledge. It was a place where information was exchanged, where the mysteries of the world were unraveled. To a creature living a subsistence existence in the cold woods, what we did in this room must have looked like magic. We turned symbols into words, and words into stories. We turned numbers into answers. He was drawn to the magic, a moth circling the light of literacy, willing to risk exposure just to catch a glimpse of the spell being cast. The parents' talk of hunting parties was still buzzing in the town, fueled by fear and whiskey. They saw a monster that needed to be put down before it hurt someone. They couldn't see what I saw. If I told them the monster liked music and tried to do math with rocks, they would think I had gone cabin crazy, or worse, that I was a sympathizer. I was alone with this secret. I had to protect my students inside the classroom, but I realized I also had a duty to the student outside of it. I couldn't let him be killed for the crime of curiosity. I knew I couldn't bring him inside. The panic would be catastrophic, but I couldn't leave him out there to struggle with scraps of understanding either. If he wanted to learn, if he was willing to risk his life to watch us, then he deserved a lesson plan. I needed to bridge the gap. I needed to move the classroom to the one place where we could meet on neutral ground. I looked at the edge of the woods, where a flat stump sat like a natural desk, and a plan began to form in my mind, a way to test the limits of his mind without exposing him to the barrel of a gun. I chose a massive cedar stump about 20 yards past the tree line as the site for my experiment. It was flat, waist-high, and shielded from the schoolyard by a thicket of huckleberry bushes, offering the privacy a shy student would need. I waited until the children had gone home on Friday afternoon, the winter sun dipping low and casting long blue shadows across the snow. I felt a strange thrill, a mix of scientific curiosity and illicit excitement, as I carried my supplies into the woods. I wasn't setting a trap for a beast. I was setting a desk for a scholar. I kept the curriculum simple for the first lesson. I placed a durable slate chalkboard on the stump, along with a thick stick of white chalk. Beside it, I arranged a set of wooden alphabet blocks, large, tactile things painted in bright primary colors, and a sturdy picture book about farm animals. I laid them out with deliberate precision, creating an invitation that screamed order. I wanted him to know this wasn't accidental debris, it was a gift. I stepped back, looking at the incongruous sight of educational supplies in the wild, feeling like a missionary leaving a Bible on a savage shore. The weekend passed in a blur of anxiety. I found myself pacing my small cabin, wondering if the raccoons would steal the blocks, or if the snow would ruin the book. But more than that, I worried about the intelligence I was betting on. Was I projecting my own desires onto a wild animal? Would I return to find the slate smashed and the book shredded for betting? Monday morning felt like an eternity away. When I finally arrived at the schoolhouse at dawn, I bypassed the front door and went straight to the tree line, my boots crunching loudly in the frozen crust. The classroom had been visited. That much was immediately clear. The snow around the stump was packed down by large, bare feet, the prints overlapping in a way that suggested hours of standing and shifting weight. I approached the stump with my heart in my throat. The materials weren't scattered. They were rearranged. The alphabet blocks, which I had left in a random pile, were now lined up in a perfectly straight row along the edge of the stump. They weren't in alphabetical order, but they were grouped by color, reds with reds, blues with blues. It was a categorization task, executed with flawless logic. But the slate was the revelation. I had drawn a simple vertical line on the left side of the board before I left. Next to my clean, straight line were 3 jagged, wavering scratches. They were crude, pressing hard enough to almost chip the slate, the work of a hand possessing immense strength but lacking fine motor control. Yet, the intent was unmistakable. He hadn't scribbled, he had tried to copy. He saw the mark I made and understood that the white stick was a tool for creation. He had attempted to mirror my action on the surface provided. Emboldened, I escalated the lesson plan. The next afternoon, I erased the slate and drew a circle. I also left a small pile of 10 smooth river stones on the left side of the stump. I moved 1 stone to the right side, trying to demonstrate the concept of moving a unit. When I checked the next morning, the circle had been copied, wobbly, looking more like a potato, but closed and round. And the stones? He had moved all of them to the right, piling them in a cairn. He hadn't understood the specific count, but he understood the action of transfer. He was engaging with the variables. I began leaving homework every day. I brought out the heavy wooden manipulatives we used for first-grade math, red squares and yellow triangles. I created patterns. Square, triangle, square. I left the sequence unfinished. The next day, the pattern was completed, stretching off the edge of the stump. He had grasped the concept of the sequence in a single night. It was staggering. I had students in the 3rd grade who struggled with pattern recognition. Yet this creature, living in the freezing woods with no language, was solving logic puzzles for fun. The picture books became his favorite. I would find them open to specific pages, usually illustrations of houses or families. The pages were never torn, never crumpled. He turned them with a delicacy that defied his size, treating the paper with the reverence of a holy text. I realized he was studying us. He was looking at the pictures of children eating dinner, of fathers driving cars, of mothers baking pies. He was studying the sociology of the species that feared him, trying to understand the domestic life he watched from the shadows. I started grading his work. If he copied a letter correctly, I would leave an apple or a piece of hard candy on the stump as a reward. Positive reinforcement. He learned the system instantly. The work improved. The scratches on the slate became more controlled. He started attempting curved lines, then intersecting lines. He was developing the fine motor skills necessary for writing, training his massive muscles to perform delicate tasks. I was witnessing the accelerated evolution of a mind, jump-started by a few pieces of chalk and a teacher who believed in him. I caught myself smiling in the middle of history lectures, thinking about my secret student in the woods. I felt a profound connection to him, a bond formed in the silence of the forest classroom. He wasn't a monster to me anymore. He was a gifted pupil held back by circumstance. But as his progress accelerated, moving from simple mimicry to complex problem-solving in a matter of weeks, a new fear began to take root. He was learning too fast. He was smarter than any animal had a right to be, and I was beginning to realize that I wasn't just teaching a clever beast, I was communicating with a peer. The progression wasn't linear, it was exponential. In the classroom, I was used to the slow, steady drip of literacy, the weeks spent sounding out vowels, the months spent mastering the multiplication table. But the student in the woods was devouring concepts with a hunger that was terrifying. It took him 3 days to master the connection between uppercase and lowercase letters, a concept that confused my 1st graders for a semester. I would leave a mixed pile of block letters on the stump, and by morning, A was paired with A, B with B, sorted with a speed that suggested he wasn't just guessing, he was decoding the cipher of our written language. I decided to test his abstract reasoning, the true divider between man and beast. I set up a simple addition problem using piles of acorns, 2 acorns, a plus sign drawn in chalk, and 3 acorns, followed by an equals sign. I left the answer side blank. When I returned, there were 5 acorns neatly stacked after the equals sign. He hadn't just moved the piles together, he had understood the operator. He understood that the symbol plus meant combine. I stood there in the freezing dawn, my breath misting in the air, realizing I was staring at evidence of mathematical computation performed by a species that science claimed didn't exist. He began to communicate back. It started with drawings. I had left a piece of paper and a charcoal pencil, asking for a drawing of a tree. He drew a pine tree, but he didn't just draw a triangle on a stick. He drew the jagged needles. He drew the pine cones, and at the base, he drew a small, stick figure representation of himself, a tall, dark shape. Then, next to it, he drew a smaller shape with 2 circles on its face. It took me a moment to realize the circles were my glasses. He wasn't just drawing scenery, he was drawing a portrait of us. He possessed self-awareness and the capacity for symbolic representation. I escalated to mechanical puzzles. I brought a simple wooden latchbox from the supply closet, placing a shiny red apple inside. A raccoon would have gnawed through the wood. A bear would have smashed it. The creature examined the hinge. He examined the sliding bolt. When I found the box the next day, it was open, undamaged, the apple gone. He had manipulated the mechanism with intention. He understood cause and effect, leverage and design. He was an engineer in the rough, limited only by the lack of tools, not by the lack of understanding. The speed of his acquisition forced me to question everything I knew about intelligence. Was it possible that his isolation was actually an advantage? He had no television to rot his mind, no social distractions, no noise. He brought a terrifying, singular focus to every task. When he studied with every fiber of his being, applying a survivalist's intensity to academics. He was the ultimate student, unburdened by boredom or cynicism. He treated the alphabet not as a chore, but as a survival skill, a code that needed to be cracked to understand the invaders in his territory. I began to suspect he was practicing elsewhere. I found evidence of it during a perimeter walk. Patches of smooth dirt cleared under the rhododendrons where crude letters were practiced over and over with a stick. A-A-B-B-B. He was doing homework. He was drilling himself. The dedication was humbling. I had students who wouldn't lift a finger unless I stood over them. Yet, here was a Bigfoot freezing in the snow, perfecting his penmanship by moonlight. It spoke to a deep, aching desire to bridge the gap, to elevate himself beyond the silence of the woods. One morning, I left a map of the valley on the stump, a topographic survey I used for geography. I marked the schoolhouse with an X. When I returned, there was a new mark. He had used a piece of charcoal to mark a spot high up in the granite peaks, miles away in the impassable terrain. He was showing me his home. He understood the abstraction of the map, recognized the landmarks, and located himself within the spatial representation. It was a sophisticated cognitive leap that required translating a 2D image into a 3D reality. The line between animal and person vanished completely for me. You cannot teach algebra to a bear. You cannot discuss geography with a wolf. This was a person, a non-human person perhaps, but a person nonetheless. He had a mind, a personality, a curiosity, and a will. The biological classification felt increasingly irrelevant. He was my star pupil, the one I designed my lessons for, the one who challenged me to be a better teacher. I found myself saving the best books for him, the ones with the most complex ideas, wondering if he could grasp the themes of loneliness and Robinson Crusoe. But his intelligence brought a new set of risks. He was getting bold. Confidence is the byproduct of learning, and he was becoming confident in his interactions with the school. He started leaving the completed lessons closer to the building, sometimes on the steps of the porch rather than the stump. He was pushing the boundary, eager for faster feedback. He wanted to be part of the main class. He didn't want to be relegated to the remedial desk in the woods anymore. I tried to push him back, to keep the separation clear for his own safety, but the momentum of curiosity is hard to arrest. The children, with their sharp eyes and intuitive sense of the uncanny, were noticing things. They noticed the missing chalk. They noticed that Mr. Carlyle spent a lot of time at the edge of the woods. And they noticed that the monster they were so afraid of hadn't thrown a pine cone in weeks. The fear in the playground was replaced by a hushed, vibrating curiosity. They knew something was happening in the trees, and children, by their nature, are explorers who do not respect boundaries. The inevitable discovery happened on a Tuesday, sparked by an errant kickball that sailed over the huckleberry bushes and landed squarely in the forest classroom. Before I could blow my whistle, Tommy Miller scrambled through the brush to retrieve it. I froze on the porch, expecting a scream of terror when he saw the massive footprints or the slate board. Instead, there was a confused silence. Then a shout, not of fear, but of discovery. "Mr. Carlyle, come look! He's doing his sums!" Within seconds, the entire student body had breached the perimeter, crowding around the stump like pilgrims at a shrine. I rushed over, heart hammering, preparing to shepherd them back to safety, but the scene I found stopped me dead. They weren't recoiling in horror, they were critiquing the work. Sarah was tracing the lines of the charcoal drawing the creature had left, a clumsy but recognizable sketch of a deer. "He presses too hard," she observed critically, "but he got the antlers right." The fear that had gripped the playground weeks ago had evaporated instantly in the face of homework. To these children, a monster was something that hid under the bed. Something that practiced arithmetic on a stump was just a classmate. I had a choice to make in that moment. I could drag them back, deny everything, and instill the fear of God in them. Or I could trust their innocence. I looked at their faces, open, curious, devoid of the prejudice that calcified in adults. "Yes," I said quietly, "he is learning, just like you." The admission changed the atmosphere in the clearing from a crime scene to a club meeting. They looked at the woods not with suspicion, but with a sudden conspiratorial warmth. They realized they were sharing their school with a secret auditor. The exchange began the very next day. I watched from the window as 8-year-old Betsy slipped a piece of her own lined paper onto the stump during recess. "For him," she whispered to her friends. It was a spelling list, her own handwriting practicing the words house, tree, friend. She was providing a study guide. By the end of the week, the stump had become a community bulletin board. The children left their old workbooks, half-used crayons, and detailed drawings of their daily lives. They were crowdsourcing his education, overwhelming the curriculum I had set with a flood of peer-to-peer tutoring. Bigfoot responded with a touching reciprocity. He didn't just take, he gave back. If a child left a drawing of a bird, he would leave a blue jay feather in the same spot the next morning. When Tommy left a shiny red marble, the creature responded with a piece of quartz that had been polished smooth by the river. It became a silent barter system, a trade of culture for nature. The children prized these gifts more than gold. They kept the feathers and stones in their pockets, fingering them during lessons like talismans, tangible proof of their connection to the wild boy in the woods. The dynamic in the schoolhouse shifted. The us versus Them mentality that usually defines the human relationship with nature dissolved. The children began to sing louder during morning music, explicitly directing their voices toward the open window so he could hear the high notes. When I read Call of the Wild aloud, the room was pin-drop silent. The students casting glances at the forest, imagining their friend listening from the brush. He was no longer a theoretical concept. He was an honorary member of the class, present in spirit, if not in body. I realized that children possess a fluidity of acceptance that adults lose. They didn't care about his taxonomy. They didn't care that he was covered in fur or that he couldn't speak. They judged him by his output. He was trying to learn, and in the meritocracy of a one-room schoolhouse, effort was the only currency that mattered. They felt protective of him. I heard the older boys admonishing the younger ones not to run too close to the stump so they wouldn't scare him off while he's thinking. They had become his guardians. This shared secret forged a bond among the students that was ironclad. The petty squabbles between the grades vanished. They were united by the conspiracy. They knew, without me ever saying it, that their parents wouldn't understand. They knew the men with the rifles would see a trophy where they saw a friend. "Don't tell your dad," became the playground mantra. They became experts at counterintelligence, hiding their forest gifts in their boots before walking home, scrubbing the charcoal from their hands, presenting a mask of normalcy to the adult world. I felt the immense pride watching them. I was teaching them math and reading, but the creature was teaching them empathy. He was teaching them that intelligence comes in many forms, and that connection transcends species. The forest classroom had become the most important part of their education. It was a utopia of pure learning, uncorrupted by the fear and violence of the outside world. For a few glorious weeks, we were a perfect society of 16 students, 15 inside, 1 outside, bound together by the pursuit of knowledge. But secrets in a small town are like water in a cracked cup. Eventually they leak. The change in the children's demeanor, the lack of fear, the hushed whispers, the way they rushed to school in the morning, didn't go unnoticed. The parents were suspicious of the sudden enthusiasm. And then, a delivery truck driver, taking a shortcut down the dirt road, saw something tall and dark retreating from the schoolyard at dawn. He didn't see a student. He saw a monster. And unlike the children, his first instinct wasn't to share a crayon. It was to drive straight to the sheriff's office. The fragile bubble of our utopia popped with the arrival of a black sedan from Missoula. A journalist named Everson, smelling a story that could syndicate nationally, parked right in front of the schoolhouse gate, his fedora pulled low against the glare. He didn't care about the curriculum or the children's grades. He wanted the bitterroot beast. He marched up the steps with a notebook and a predatory smile, asking leading questions about wild men and strange tracks. I tried to stonewall him, playing the role of the skeptical academic, but he had already heard the truck driver's story. He wasn't looking for truth. He was looking for a quote to anchor the panic. He made the mistake of trying to interview the children during recess. He cornered Sarah by the swing set, crouching down with a conspiratorial grin, asking if she'd ever felt watched by the woods. I watched from the porch, ready to intervene, but I didn't need to. Sarah looked him dead in the eye and lied with a composure that would have made a poker player jealous. "No, sir," she said flatly. "Just deer, sometimes a bear. My daddy shot a bear last year." The other children gathered around, forming a silent, protective phalanx. They played dumb. They realized instinctively that this man was an enemy of their friend, and they shut him out completely. But Everson didn't need their cooperation to cause damage. His article ran on Sunday, titled "Terror in the Schoolyard," painting a lurid picture of a King Kong-like monster stalking innocent pioneer children. The effect was immediate and incendiary. By Monday morning, the atmosphere in the valley had shifted from cautious curiosity to militant aggression. The fathers weren't whispering anymore, they were organizing. A town hall meeting was called, not to discuss the budget, but to plan a sweep of the forest surrounding the school. The rhetoric was violent. Protect our own, shoot on sight, eradicate the threat. The hunting party formed in the parking lot of the general store. 20 men, a dozen baying hounds, and enough high-caliber rifles to start a small war. I saw the trucks rolling past the schoolhouse, the gun racks full, the men looking grim and purposeful. My heart sank. They weren't bad men. They were terrified fathers trying to be heroes in a story they didn't understand. They thought they were slaying a dragon to save the village. They had no idea they were mobilizing an army to execute a scholar. The panic inside the classroom was palpable. The children knew. They saw their father's trucks. They heard the dogs. The older boys, usually stoic, looked close to tears. "They're gonna kill him, Mr. Carlyle," Tommy whispered, clutching his desk. "They don't know he's good." The injustice of it was breaking them. To them, Bigfoot wasn't livestock or game. He was a classmate who sat in the back row. The idea of their fathers hunting him down was a betrayal that shattered their worldview. The authority figures they trusted were suddenly the villains. I tried to keep order, to distract them with geography, but it was useless. The sound of the hounds baying in the distance was a constant, terrifying soundtrack. Finally, Sarah stood up, slamming her book shut. "We have to tell them," she announced, her voice trembling with rage. "We have to show them the work." Before I could stop her, she grabbed the slate from the windowsill, the one with the creature's latest arithmetic practice, and marched out the door. The rest of the class followed, a stampede of desperate advocacy pouring into the yard just as the first group of hunters pulled up to check the perimeter. It was a standoff I never could have imagined. 15 children standing between the forest and the armed men, holding up drawings, rocks, and slate boards like shields. "Look!" Tommy screamed at his father, thrusting a piece of charcoal paper at him. "He drew a bird. He knows math. You can't shoot him." The hunters stopped, confused, lowering their rifles. They looked at the crude artifacts, then at me, their expressions shifting from anger to bewilderment. They expected hysteria. They got a defense attorney's closing argument delivered by 7-year-olds. "He's not a monster, Dad," one of the Miller boys pleaded, tears streaming down his face. "He's our friend. He helps us with spelling." The men looked at the slate boards, seeing the shaky, heavy-handed letters copied there. For a moment, I saw hesitation. The evidence of intelligence was right there in their hands. The narrative of the mindless beast was cracking under the weight of the children's testimony. The dogs whined, sensing the confusion in their masters. It was a fragile moment where truth almost won out. But fear is a powerful drug. One of the men, a hard-eyed rancher named Miller, swatted the slate from his son's hand. It shattered on the frozen ground. "That's enough," he roared. "Mr. Carlyle has filled your heads with fairy tales. That thing is a wild animal and it's dangerous. Now get inside before you get hurt." He didn't look at the evidence. He refused to look. Accepting the creature's intelligence meant accepting that he was about to commit murder, and his conscience couldn't handle that. He chose willful blindness. He re-racked his rifle and signaled the dogs. The children screamed, a sound of pure, impotent heartbreak. I ushered them back inside, physically blocking the door as the men turned toward the woods. I looked at their devastated faces, their trust in the adult world lying in pieces on the floor like the broken slate. They had tried to do the right thing. They had used logic, evidence, and empathy, everything I had taught them, and it hadn't mattered. The world was marching on with its violence, indifferent to the truth. I realized then that I had one final duty to perform. I couldn't stop the hunt, but I had to teach my students how to survive the heartbreak of it. The sound of the trucks fading into the timber was the loneliest sound I had ever heard. The classroom was a mausoleum of silence. The children sat at their desks, not crying anymore, just staring at the floor with the hollow, shell-shocked expression of soldiers who had lost a battle they didn't know they were fighting. I walked to the window and picked up a piece of the shattered slate from the porch, turning the jagged shard over in my hand. It was a physical representation of their broken trust. I knew we weren't doing spelling or geography today. I closed the textbook, sat on the edge of my desk, and prepared to deliver a lecture that wasn't in any state-approved curriculum. "Look at me," I said, my voice cutting through the gloom. They looked up, their eyes red-rimmed and accusing. "I know you're angry. I know you hate them right now. But you have to understand something very difficult. Your fathers aren't bad men. They are frightened men." I saw Sarah shake her head, but I pressed on. Fear makes people blind. When people see something they don't understand, something that breaks the rules of their world, their first instinct isn't to study it. It's to destroy it. They are trying to protect you from a monster because they can't imagine a world where a monster can be a friend. I walked down the aisle, making eye contact with every single one of them. You tried to show them the truth. You showed them the math, the drawings, and they swatted it away. That is the hardest lesson you will ever learn. The truth alone is not always enough to save you. Sometimes being right doesn't stop the gun. Sometimes being special, being different, or being gifted makes you a target, not a hero. It was a brutal thing to say to children, but I refused to lie to them again. They needed armor for the world they were growing up in, and the truth was the only steel I had. Our friend in the woods knew this, I continued, gesturing to the empty tree line. "Why do you think he hid? Why do you think he stayed in the shadows? He wasn't ashamed. He was surviving. He understood something that you are just learning today. Camouflage isn't just for deer. Sometimes the most important survival skill is knowing when to hide your light. He kept his intelligence a secret because he knew the world wasn't ready for it. And today, the world proved him right." I saw a flicker of understanding in Tommy's eyes. "Is he dead?" he whispered. the question hanging in the air like smoke. I shook my head firmly. No, think about how smart he is. Think about how fast he learned. He saw the trucks before they saw him. He smelled the dogs before they caught a scent. He's been watching us for months. Do you think he didn't see this coming? He's gone. He's miles away, deep in the high country where the trucks can't follow. He took the lessons we gave him, the maps, the logic, and he's using them to stay alive. It was a half-truth, a hope I was desperate to believe myself, but it gave them a lifeline. But now, I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, we have a job to do, the most important job. We have to help him hide. They leaned in, the spark of purpose returning to their faces. If we keep arguing with your parents, if we keep insisting he's smart, they will keep hunting. They will keep looking until they find him to prove us wrong. To save him, we have to let them believe they were right. We have to let them believe he was just a bear or a shadow. We have to stop talking about him, I said, emphasizing every word. We don't leave gifts on the stump anymore. We don't sing to the woods. We let the forest go quiet. It will feel like a betrayal, but it is the ultimate act of friendship. We are giving him the cover of silence. We are becoming his camouflage. I watched the realization settle over them. I was asking them to carry a burden of secrecy that no child should have to bear, asking them to stifle their wonder to protect a life. It was a heavy cloak, but they put it on willingly. You are the keepers of the truth, I told them. Years from now, people will tell stories about the bitterroot beast, about the monster. You will know the truth. You will remember the math problems and the blue jay feathers. That knowledge is yours. It belongs to this room. You are the witnesses to a miracle that the rest of the world was too blind to see. And because you know the truth, you will grow up to be different than the men in those trucks. You will be the kind of adults who look before they shoot. That is his legacy. That is what he taught you. The bell rang for dismissal, a shrill sound that felt irrelevant. The children packed their bags in silence. There was no running, no shouting. They walked out of the schoolhouse with the solemn dignity of secret agents. As they passed the stump at the edge of the woods, not a single one of them looked at it. They stared straight ahead, walking down the road, playing their part in the great deception. They were protecting their friend by ignoring him, a heartbreaking display of disciplined love. I stood on the porch and watched them go, 15 small figures disappearing into the gray afternoon. I looked at the forest one last time. The stump was bare, the slate gone, the blocks put away. The classroom was closed. The woods were just woods again, silent and indifferent. But I knew that somewhere in the high peaks, a creature was watching the sunset, perhaps drawing a map in the dirt, alive because a group of children loved him enough to let him go. I turned and went back inside to sweep the broken slate from the floor, ready to teach the next day, knowing I had already taught the most important lesson of my life.